as we bring you a roundup of some of the biggest stories in East Africa. And we'll be joined this morning by Darren Bartlett, and he'll be talking to us. Good morning, Darren. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, the last time that we heard, Yoweri Museveni, the president of Uganda, had ordered the lockdown of 2 districts in light of the Ebola pandemic. It also appears that schools will now dismiss students 2 weeks earlier than anticipated. What's new, and why close the schools so soon?
Well, just maybe to take you back to when we first had a lockdown due to COVID-19. I know we're speaking Ebola, but the first time we had our first wave of the lockdown, everything was okay. We had very few cases of people who died. And then when the country opened up partially, we went into the second wave, and we saw students who maybe children who left their homes and went back to school. They actually spread the virus more at that time because they believed that kids were more of a carrier. They were low risk, they were at a low risk of, dying from the virus. But given that the fact that these kids used to go to school and then back home, so the kids would spread the virus amongst themselves and then take it back home, and that's how their parents died. We had a huge number of people dying at that time. Now, in that, given that precedent there, the Ministry of Health felt like we're still having a lot of kids going back to, they're going to school, especially those who are not in boarding schools. They go to school and then interact with friends, and then that's how they're able to spread the virus of Ebola to today, because we've already had about 8 of them die. And there was that fear that the same thing that happened at that time could actually lead to more spreading of the disease as of now. So they felt, as the schools are going through exams, let them send back home the others that are not sitting for exams. Let it be depopulated, let the schools be depopulated so that we concentrate with a few numbers. They should have enough spacing while they do their exams, and they also go home earlier. Instead of staying and interacting with the others, they could be, and the way kids play, they play while touching each other. If you study on how Ebola is spread with body fluids and things, it's most likely that they're going to carry this virus and take it back home to parents who have many underlying conditions and other diseases. And just like that, we may lose a big number. I know some scientists have come up with some figures that Uganda is likely to lose about 500 people. We have not yet reached there. We are just at 53 people confirmed dead. So we believe that, also as a government, believes that by sending children home, we reduce the risk of actually spreading the Ebola virus.
Yes. 53 people is a huge number, Darren. We're just hoping that these numbers do not increase. But let's talk about what the news is saying. Now, there have been reports that Uganda, and I'm glad that you made reference to the COVID-19, which is what I'm about to do. There have been reports that Uganda is basically making some of the mistakes that Wuhan made at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, which would be a mistake of secrecy and not sharing the exact extent of the damage that this is. Now, we recall that at the first point of call, Yoweri Museveni did say that there will be no lockdown and that Uganda had this under control. But now we're seeing a different story. It's extended to several districts, including Kampala. And what we're seeing now is there have been reports. I mean, you talked about the projections of about 500 deaths. We're not there. We hope not to get there. But does Uganda really have this situation under control? Especially seeing as the index case was, he had gone to several hospitals before death 3 weeks later. So talk to us. Do you really believe Uganda has the situation under control?
Yes, I would say Uganda has the situation under control. They're already building facilities, emergency facilities that can handle this kind of cases. We can go back as far as 1997, 1998, 2000, when Uganda first had Ebola cases. We saw doctors die and quite a number of people in the northern part of Uganda. But Uganda managed to maintain or to contain the spread of Ebola from those districts to spreading down to the central district and eastern part and plus the West Nile. And Uganda always goes back to its books on how did we manage to contain the virus at that time. Because it's not the first time Uganda is recording this. This could be actually the third time recording Ebola virus in the country. So it's, Ebola and COVID are very different. I know that there's a concern by the World Health Organization and other medics about Uganda keeping this as a secret. It's not actually a secret. Uganda has always been putting out this kind of information, the number of people affected, the number of people buried, who have passed on from the Ebola virus, even COVID itself. So I disagree with the thoughts that it's secrecy. However, this approach, this very time, the reason why the government approached it this way, this time, apart from how it did it the other time, is because of the consequences that we've been facing from lockdown. The impact of the lockdown, the economy collapsed. If you've been following the economy of Uganda, there's high fuel prices, food prices have gone up, most factories collapsed, many workplaces actually closed. So they are trying to put partial lockdowns with the economy in the mind. Otherwise, we may actually have to go back to a point where people are no longer producing food because they can't go out because they're under lockdown. People are not doing businesses like in banks. They may shut down. That means transactions will all go down. So what they did is to rush and lock down districts like Murende, where it was first registered, and the neighboring districts. And Kampala was not locked down, even when there are some cases that were actually found within Kampala. But those ones were traced. They called it human tracing or human contact. Those people who were in contact with those who had the virus at that time, they traced them, phoned
contact
them, took them to hospitals, and those people have been, it was contained that way. Otherwise, Kampala has 4 million people. All of them could have gotten the virus since they all shop almost in the same areas. So yes, those were traced cases, and they were put together, isolated from the public, and others died, but others are still under treatment.
All right.
And yeah, they just use that kind of approach. There's no secrecy as much as we know. At least the government has put up portals that we go to and see this information, access the personnel. The permanent secretary has been so open about this, just to make sure that if the public knows what is going on, then they'll be more careful.
Okay.
All right, Darren, let's move on to the next story and look at what's going on in East Africa. Let's focus on COP27 going on in Egypt. How has the climate been thus far, first of all, in the East African region? I mean, in the new vision of November 10, 2022, particularly page 14, we did see President Yoweri Museveni saying that they will not accept one rule for them from the Europeans and another norm for us. So he was saying different rule for the Europeans and a different one for Africa. And this is only one example of the forceful responses we witness from East African leaders, Ugandans in particular. Now, he also mentioned that we won't let Europeans or Europe's failure to reach its own climate objectives impede African progress. Let's just take a look at COP. Just give us a wrap up of what's really going on from the eastern part of Africa concerning COP27 in Egypt.
Before we come on air, I was telling you how the weather has already changed. There are very abnormal times, and when it used to rain, we used to have 3 seasons. Now you can no longer tell which season you're in January, it's raining when it's not supposed to be raining, and the other time it's hot when it's not supposed to be hot. And on a whole, generally, when we look at East Africa, we can say that even statistics show that about 30 million people at the risk of facing famine because of the hot, dry season that has been available, especially in the Horn of Africa and most parts in Kenya. Even Uganda has the same issue. We've seen people die in places of Turkana, come to Somalia. About 3 million people are malnourished already. Those are kids, counting kids who are malnourished. And these are just statistics that you can come across, but they just give you a picture, but they don't give you the exact number that is down, because if someone tells you that 3 million children are malnourished now because of famine caused by climate change, then the number could be bigger if you go on ground and assess. So what the leaders in East Africa are saying is that, look, we are facing this because the European countries are not honoring the agreements that they made in 2015 in COP26. To be specific, Dr. Suluhu, the president of Tanzania, said that we could have already moved to 80% in terms of using clean energy. However, the European countries are not honoring the nations that they promised that they would be giving Africa to move away from using fossil fuels to clean energy. The same thing that Ruto, the president of Tanzania, said. He said, look, I know we come every time here to talk about these things of climate change, what we should be doing, what we should not be doing. But if you look at Africa as a whole, it has only contributed 3% of the carbon dioxide emissions. And we are suffering the biggest in Africa because of what the Asians have done, the Europeans have done through manufacturing and all, whatever they're using the fossil fuels for. And at the end of the day, you're seeing places like in Kenya where mudslides are. In Uganda, just recently, about 4 months ago, we had a mudslide that killed about 56 people in the western. Those were the people who were accounted for. And then we had floods that were happening in the eastern part of Uganda. Kenya is facing the same things. People are losing livestock. People are losing kids because they don't have anything to eat. So if you want the East African region, specifically, okay, well, African region at whole, to move away from what they were using what they were using as fossil fuels, and you want them to substitute, then you have to give us help. You have to come and build the roads that you want to build with using the right materials that will not cause climate change issues. You have to come and give us alternatives of clean energy. Now, what you saw as a story that you see in the new vision that the president wrote, actually, that was his later, he wrote it and published it himself, where he was saying, he was actually going back to Europeans for trying to stop Africans from exploiting their mineral resources within Africa because they believe that those mineral resources are going to be a danger to the climate, something that they're trying to, resolve.
Maybe we can call that some form of double standards, from where the president stands. Yes, and
exactly.
The truth is, we can't continue to have this conversation, and we would not exhaust it because there's so many angles to it, Darren. They said they will pay $100 billion every year. They've never met up with that. They've talked about now there are conversations about payment of loss and damage, but we don't know if that is eventually going to happen. We can go on and on, but unfortunately we've run out of time. So we thank you, Darren, for joining us this morning. We look forward to having you again as we explore more stories around East Africa. See you next week.